I remember that Christmas Eve for one reason. It was the night I thought I'd never make it home. The snow fell thick and fast across the empty streets of Minneapolis, smothering everything in an unnatural silence. It wasn't the cozy, peaceful kind of quiet you see on holiday cards. It was heavy, suffocating, like something lurking was holding its breath. I'd stayed too long at a friend's Christmas party. One too many drinks, too much small talk. Midnight came and went, and I found myself wobbling onto the frozen sidewalk, cheeks burning from the cold and alcohol. My car was out of the question, so like everyone else, I pulled out my phone and called an Uber. The car that pulled up didn't look right. It was an old black sedan, half covered in dirty snow and ice. The headlights flickered briefly before steadying. I should have felt grateful, but I hesitated. Something about it, the silence of its arrival, the way it seemed to wait, sent a cold twist through my gut. The driver rolled down the window. He wore a faded Santa hat tipped over one ear, his red jacket frayed at the seams. His face was a shadowy blur under the cab's dim light. "Jake?" he rasped. The voice made me flinch. It was low, cracked, like he'd been speaking to himself for hours. "Yeah, that's me." I climbed into the back seat, letting the freezing air swallow me whole. The car smelled faintly of pine needles, sharp, but sour somehow, like the forest was rotting. The Christmas music playing on the radio's silent night sounded distorted, the voices slow, stretched out of tune. I glanced at the driver again. His gloved hands strangled the steering wheel, knuckles white beneath the leather. But worse was the rearview mirror. He wasn't looking at the road. He was staring straight at me. His head didn't move, but his eyes, empty and fixed, watched me, like I'd done something wrong. The air in the car turned colder, like someone else had climbed in and shut the door. And then, faintly, from somewhere I couldn't see, I heard it, sleigh bells. The car rolled forward, its tires crunching over fresh snow like bones underfoot. Outside, the streetlights were hazy through the thickening storm. I checked my phone to track the route, but the app showed something strange: no estimated arrival time, no route. Just a spinning wheel and the words, "rerouting." "Hey," I called out, leaning forward. "You missed the turn. It's faster if you get back on the main road." The driver didn't respond. He just kept staring ahead, his grip on the wheel tighter now, as though he were holding back something unseen. "Tell me, what would you do? Would you sit quietly and hope it's just in your head? Or would you demand answers like I did?" His shoulders were hunched up beneath his red coat, and I noticed for the first time that it looked wet-soaked at the seams, like he'd been out in the snow for hours. "Did you hear me?" My voice cracked a little. I hated how it sounded, small, unsure. "The GPS says you're going the wrong way." That's when he turned his head. Just slightly, just enough to make my skin crawl. "I know a shortcut," he said. His voice didn't fit the inside of that car. It was gravelly, hollow, like someone whispering into a drain pipe. A chill passed through me, and I glanced out the window to shake it off. What I saw made my stomach drop. We weren't on a road anymore, not really. The snow had swallowed the pavement, and the houses had disappeared. You're probably thinking, why didn't I jump out? I thought about it too, trust me. But sometimes fear pins you down harder than any locked door. All I could see were tall, spindly trees pressing against the storm like skeletal hands. Christmas lights flickered between the branches in bursts of red and green, but there were no houses. Just lights strung where no lights should be. I tapped the screen of my phone, desperate for a signal, but the battery icon blinked red and then died. I swore under my breath. "You sure about this shortcut?" I asked, forcing a laugh. It sounded thin, wrong. The driver didn't answer. Instead, I heard it again, soft and distant. Sleigh bells. Only now they were closer. The sleigh bells were louder now, though I couldn't see anything beyond the snow and those flickering lights. My pulse hammered in my ears as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was something stuck to the tires, or a trick of the wind. "Look, man," I said, my voice wavering, "I'm serious. Stop the car. I'll get out here." The driver didn't answer. His Santa hat sagged over his ear, but I could see his mouth in the dim reflection of the rearview mirror. He was smiling. I grabbed for the door handle. It didn't move. Locked. "What the hell?" I muttered, tugging harder. The driver finally spoke, his voice soft, almost sing-song. "You don't want to get out here." The way he said it froze me. I looked out the window again, and this time I noticed something worse. Between the spindly trees, shadows moved, tall figures with limbs too long, standing perfectly still except for their heads, which slowly turned as we passed. I blinked, my breath fogging up the glass. The shadows were closer now, peeking from behind the trees like children playing hide and seek. And still the bells rang. "Who are they?" I whispered without meaning to. The driver laughed softly. It wasn't a human sound, it was thin and stretched, like air leaking from a tire. "They're waiting, just like every year." I turned to face him, my body cold with dread. "What do you mean every year? Where are you taking me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed down on the gas. The engine roared and the car lurched forward, faster now, snow whipping past the windows like white knives. In the side mirror, I saw something following us, dark shapes darting between the trees, too fast to be human. The bells clanged louder, chaotic now, like they were laughing. I yanked out my phone again, desperate, but the screen stayed black, reflecting only my pale face and something else, a figure sitting in the seat next to me. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned my head, praying I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Something sat in the seat beside me. It wore tattered clothes that might have been red once, but now hung in damp, rotting folds. Its face, I wish I hadn't looked. Pale, almost gray, with hollow pits where the eyes should have been. It smiled wide and too many teeth. "Keep going," it rasped, its voice scraping like ice against glass. I choked out a scream and threw myself against the door. "Let me out! Let me out!" The driver didn't even glance back. He slammed his foot on the gas, the car rattling as it sped faster, snow blurring everything outside. "Where are you taking me?" I shouted. My throat burned, but the sleigh bells drowned out my voice, louder and louder, until they were all I could hear, like they were inside my head. The figure turned its head toward me slowly, its neck cracking like dry twigs. "Home," it said. The lights outside multiplied, brighter now. I realized they weren't Christmas lights. They were lanterns, hundreds of them, held by the figures standing in the woods. I could see them clearly through the swirling snow now, their long arms reaching out as if to pull me from the car. I reached for the window, punching it with my fist. It cracked but didn't break. "Stop the car," I screamed. The driver finally turned his head toward me. I'll never forget his face, gray, hollow, eyes as black as oil. "Almost there," he whispered. The car swerved suddenly, tires skidding over ice. The world tilted, the bells roaring, and then everything went black. I woke up face down in the snow, gasping for air. My head pounded, and the cold bit through my clothes like needles. The storm had stopped. It was silent, too silent. I pushed myself upright and looked around. The car was gone. The road was gone. I was sitting in the middle of a snow-covered clearing, surrounded by dark, skeletal trees. The only light came from lanterns, dozens of them hung from branches like ornaments, and the bells. They were faint now, distant, but I could still hear them. I stumbled to my feet, pulling my phone from my pocket. The screen flickered to life, and for a second I thought I'd be okay. Then I saw it, ride complete. I stared at the app, my throat dry. The pickup and drop-off locations were blank. Just a total fare, $6.66. A sound behind me made me turn. Footprints, dozens of them, appeared in the snow, moving toward me from every direction. No bodies, no faces. Just prints, crunching softly as they closed in. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran until the lanterns disappeared and the forest opened up to an empty road. I don't remember how I got home. I woke up the next morning on my front steps, frostbitten and shaking. Every Christmas Eve since, I heard the faint sound of bells outside my window, growing closer. And when I check my phone, I see the same notification. Your driver is arriving. I should have just driven myself. I tell myself that every Christmas night when I replay what happened. It was late, close to midnight, when I finally left the hospital after pulling a 12-hour shift. I'm Mark, a nurse. Holidays on the floor are brutal, but I'd promised my nieces I'd drop off their presents before morning. The city was quiet as I stood shivering outside, waiting for my Uber. Snow drifted across the sidewalks like slow-moving ghosts. A car pulled up black, slick with melted snow. The headlights dimmed for a moment, then steadied. I checked the license plate. It matched. But when I opened the door, I hesitated. "Mark?" the driver asked. His voice was hoarse, as though he'd been coughing or screaming all night. "Yeah, that's me," I muttered, climbing into the back seat. The driver wore a reindeer sweater that looked ancient, moth-bitten at the collar. He never turned to look at me, just stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel like it might slip from his fingers. We drove in silence at first. I leaned back, my muscles aching, and watched the Christmas lights blur outside the window. That's when I heard it. Humming, soft, childlike humming. A slow, broken version of Silent Night. I sat up straight, my skin prickling. "You got the radio on?" I asked. The driver didn't answer. He didn't even blink. But in the rearview mirror, I swear I saw something sitting in the seat behind me. I glanced back over my shoulder, heart hammering, but the back seat was empty. Just dark upholstery and the faint smell of something stale like old waterlogged wood. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was the shadows playing tricks. That's what I told myself. But when I looked back at the rearview mirror, I froze. There it was again, just a shape this time, blurry, like someone had been there a second ago and vanished. "You've done it too, haven't you?" "Check the back seat, just to be sure you were alone." "What would you do if you saw what I saw?" I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the tension out of my shoulders. "You okay up there, man?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound normal. The driver didn't respond. He didn't even twitch. The humming started again, clearer now, soft, childlike, and unmistakably coming from behind me. Silent Night. The sound scratched against my brain like nails on glass. I spun around in my seat, cold sweat running down my back. "Who's there?" No one. The back seat was still empty, but something was off. The air felt colder, heavier. My breath fogged up the window, and the shadows seemed to gather, lingering too long at the corners of my vision. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice cracking. I checked the app on my phone. The map was frozen, stuck in place, the little car icon not moving. The driver finally spoke. "She doesn't like it when you look." "What?" I stared at him, the pit in my stomach widening. He said nothing else. his hands clenched tighter around the wheel, his knuckles pale and waxy. I looked at the mirror again, just to prove to myself that I was imagining it. I wish I hadn't. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was her. A little girl sitting in the seat behind me. Her face was pale, eyes too wide, and her mouth was smiling. I couldn't breathe. The little girl's face stared back at me through the mirror, her smile wide and unchanging, as if her lips were carved into her skin. Her eyes were empty, two black holes pulling everything around them into darkness. I whipped around, searching the back seat. Nothing. But in the mirror, she was still there, watching me. "Stop the car," I yelled, panic clawing at my throat. I said, "Stop the damn car." The driver didn't flinch. He just whispered under his breath, too low for me to hear. His hands never left the wheel, his gaze fixed dead ahead, like he couldn't see me at all. I grabbed at the door handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The lock clicked softly. I turned back to the mirror, desperate to look anywhere else. Her face was closer now. She was leaning forward, her small body almost touching my shoulder, though there was no weight, no presence. Just cold air and the faint, rotting smell of damp earth. "I want to go home," I stammered, shaking. "Please, what is this? What do you want from me?" The humming started again, louder now. The little girl's mouth moved slowly, her voice dragging the words out of the air, like it hurt to say them. "Silent night. Holy night." The car sped up. The city lights outside turned into smears of color, spinning faster and faster. I pressed myself against the door, watching the mirror like it might come alive. "You're not real," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "You're not real." The driver's voice broke through the humming, soft and cold. "She doesn't like when you don't believe." The girl's reflection tilted her head slowly, her grin splitting wider, impossibly wide. Then, for the first time, I felt it, a tiny, ice-cold hand closing around my wrist. I don't know if you've ever felt true cold, something that goes deeper than skin, straight to your bones. But I promise you, you'd never forget it. His cold hand squeezed tighter, nails digging into my skin. I couldn't see her, but I felt her right there beside me, impossibly close. "Let go," I shouted, thrashing against the door. My wrist burned with icy pain, like frostbite spreading through my veins. The humming turned to a shrill, distorted wail. It was no longer music, it was something broken and wrong, crawling through my ears. The driver's voice joined it, whispering nonsense, over and over. "She doesn't like it. She doesn't like it." I turned to the mirror one last time, dreading what I'd see. She was there. The little girl sat directly behind me, her face inches from mine. Her head lolled to the side like her neck couldn't hold it up, and her mouth, oh God, her mouth hung open too wide, stretching into darkness. The humming poured from her, vibrating in my bones. The car was speeding faster now, the lights outside blending into streaks of red and green. I yanked my arm free, tearing my wrist from her grip, and pounded on the window with everything I had. "Stop the car, stop." The driver finally turned to me. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and empty. He grinned, but it wasn't his smile, it was hers, split wide and jagged. "We're here," he whispered. The car jerked to a stop. I flew forward, smashing into the seat in front of me. Everything went silent, no humming, no bells, no breathing. I looked up. The doors unlocked with a soft click. The driver was gone. The girl was gone. Outside the window, a single street lamp flickered above a small, forgotten cemetery, and the back seat door slowly swung open on its own. I don't remember how I got out of the car. My next memory is stumbling through the snow, my breath ragged and clouding in the icy air. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, the sounds of the city returning like a far-off hum. When I looked back, the car was gone. No taillights, no tracks in the snow like it had never been there at all. I walked the rest of the way home, shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. Inside my apartment, everything felt wrong, too warm, too still, as though the quiet was listening. I checked the mirror in the hallway before I could stop myself. Nothing was there, but my wrist burned where she'd grabbed me. I pulled back my sleeve and froze. Small purple fingerprints circled my skin, impossible and ice cold to the touch. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I kept hearing it in the silence, the faintest sound of humming, broken and slow, like she was just on the other side of the wall. Days later, I checked my Uber app. I don't know why. The ride was still in progress. No driver name, no destination. Just a car marked passenger 2 halves. The first seat was empty, and the second, it had my name. I deleted the app, but every night since, at exactly midnight, my phone vibrates once. Just a notification. Your ride is waiting. New York City on Christmas Eve. The streets glowed under a million lights, and I remember thinking how the city felt alive, buzzing with life and cheer, like it couldn't stop smiling. I hated it. I'm Rob, 34, divorced, just trying to make Christmas bearable for my kid. My ex had our son this year, and the silence of my apartment was unbearable, so I decided to grab a few last-minute gifts to drop off tomorrow. I called an Uber to take me to Midtown. The car pulled up clean, newer model, black. It looked normal. The driver gave me a short nod through the window. "Rob?" "Yeah," I muttered, climbing in. Inside, the air was warm but stale, like the heater had been running too long. I leaned back, the hum of the engine drowning out my thoughts, and watched the Christmas lights blur outside the window, red, green, white, blinking like stars. It felt soothing at first, but the lights, they didn't stop. I glanced at my phone to check the route. The screen flickered. No connection. Just a frozen map with a spinning wheel. "Hey, we're going the right way, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh to hide the prickle at the back of my neck. The driver didn't answer. He just kept driving, hands stiff on the wheel, eyes locked forward. Outside, the lights were brighter now, impossibly bright, string after string of them, hanging from buildings that seemed wrong. "Look, I know what you're thinking. It's just a city. It's just lights." That's what I thought, too, until they started to look back. Repeating, maybe. I leaned forward to get a better look and caught sight of the dashboard clock. 12 o'clock. It flickered, then blinked back. 12:01, and again, 12 o'clock. I felt my stomach drop. "Are we looping?" I whispered to no one in particular. The driver grinned in the mirror. The car moved in silence, except for the faint hum of the heater. Outside, the lights glared brighter than before, rows of red and green, blinking and repeating down streets that all looked the same. I wiped my palms on my jeans, trying to ignore the unease curling in my gut. "Hey," I said, leaning forward again. "You missed the turn for Midtown." The driver didn't react. I looked at the app on my phone and the map. It was wrong. The little car icon spun in place, the screen frozen except for the same words blinking softly, searching for route. "Hello," my voice cracked, louder now. "Can you hear me, man?" I said, "You missed the turn." The driver's hands gripped the wheel tighter. his knuckles ghost white. Slowly he spoke for the first time. "Just sit back. We'll be there soon." His voice was too calm, too smooth, like it didn't belong in a body. I tried to look at his reflection in the rearview mirror, but the way his face moved, like the grin I'd seen before wasn't there now, made my stomach churn. I turned back to the window, hoping to calm myself, but the lights outside, they weren't just hanging from buildings anymore. They were everywhere. Strings of Christmas lights stretched across streets that shouldn't exist, looping through alleys, hanging from lampposts, and weaving between buildings that seemed taller than before, leaning inward like they were watching me. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it, but no matter how long I stared, the same street appeared again and again. Same blinking lights. Same red mailbox on the corner. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The driver chuckled softly. "Home." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I looked down at my phone again. The battery icon flashed red before the screen went black, and then I saw it faint at first, but impossible to ignore. My reflection in the window wasn't looking at the lights anymore. It was looking at me. I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the reflection. It looked like me, same clothes, same tired face, but it wasn't. Its head tilted just slightly, its mouth curling upward into a smile that didn't belong. I turned away, heart racing, but the window now felt like it was watching me. I looked at the driver again, his face shadowed and unreadable. "Stop the car," I said, trying to sound firm. My voice cracked. "I'm serious, just let me out." He said nothing. He just grinned slow, deliberate, and pressed his foot harder on the gas. The heater blasted hot air into my face, but my skin felt cold, prickling with sweat. I looked out again, and the world outside wasn't the city I knew anymore. The streets were endless now, rows of buildings warped and wrong, their edges bending inward like a tunnel. The Christmas lights tangled in impossibly long strings, hanging in loops that stretched over and under the car. It didn't make sense. "Let me out," I shouted, yanking at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. I slammed my fist against the window, hard enough to hurt. "Stop the damn car." The driver's voice came again, soft and calm, but it felt like a blade slipping under my skin. "You can't get out. Not until you've seen the lights." "What lights?" I spat, my head pounding. He pointed. Ahead of us, the tunnel of buildings opened into something vast, a field of nothing but Christmas lights, miles of them stretching across a black horizon. "Would you have looked closer?" I did. I wish I hadn't. I'll tell you this. Not everything that glows in the dark is meant to be seen. They blinked in unison now, the colors bleeding together like 1,000 staring eyes. As we sped closer, I realized the lights weren't hanging from wires. They were attached to shapes, figures, things standing perfectly still in rows. Their bodies were black against the glow, heads tipped back, arms outstretched as if they were worshiping the lights. I looked at my reflection again. It was still smiling, but its eyes, they were gone. The car surged forward, barreling straight toward the field of lights. I pressed myself against the door, my pulse pounding like a drum in my ears. "Stop!" I screamed. "You're going to kill us." The driver didn't flinch. His hands were stone on the wheel, and his face, God, his face wasn't his anymore. It flickered in the rearview mirror, warping like static on an old TV. "You'll see," he said softly. "You'll see them soon." I turned the window again, praying this was all a hallucination. It had to be. But those things in the field were closer now, tall, dark figures wrapped in Christmas lights, their limbs too long and thin. They didn't move, but somehow I knew they were alive, waiting. The lights pulsed brighter as we neared, searing through the glass and blinding me in bursts of red, green, and white. The hum of the engine turned into a deafening roar, drowning out my thoughts. My body shook, my chest tight as if the air itself was turning against me. The car slowed, stopping just at the edge of the field. The driver let go of the wheel and turned around slowly to face me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. It wasn't human. His skin was gray and stretched thin, his eyes hollow black pits. A string of lights glowed faintly beneath his skin, as if they were inside him. "You need to get out now," he said, grinning wide enough to split his face in two. I stared at him, shaking. "What? No, I'm not." The door locks clicked open on their own. My head snapped to the window. The figures were moving now, crawling forward in slow, jerky motions. The lights on their bodies flickered faster, more erratic, like they were laughing at me. I grabbed the door handle, trying to keep it closed, but the reflection in the glass smiled back at me, my smile, before it whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the door swung open. The cold hit me like a wall, stealing the breath from my lungs. I screamed as hands, dozens of them, freezing and brittle, grabbed at my arms, my clothes, dragging me out into the field. The lights burned into my vision. My skin tingled and stung, and for the briefest moment I understood. The lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. I woke up alone, lying flat on my back in the middle of an empty street. The air was dead still. The Christmas lights, those endless, blinking lights, were gone. Only the dim glow of a single street lamp cut through the darkness. I sat up, wincing as a dull ache radiated through my body. My clothes were torn, my skin frozen and raw, as if I'd been outside for hours. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but I didn't recognize the place. No cars, no people. I checked my wristwatch. It was stuck on 12 o'clock. I scrambled to my feet and pulled out my phone. It turned on, though the screen glitched and flickered. The Uber app was still open, showing my ride as in progress. The map displayed nothing, just a black void, with a small car icon floating in the middle of nowhere. Below it, one message blinked. "Arrived at destination." "What destination?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Then, faintly, I heard it again, the hum of Christmas lights. It started soft, like it was miles away, but with every heartbeat, it grew louder, closer, until I swore I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I looked up. The street lamp buzzed and flickered, and in its glow, shadows began to stretch toward me, long and thin, crawling across the pavement like spider legs. I spun around and ran. I don't know where I was going, but I ran until my lungs burned, until the lights faded behind me. Hours later, I stumbled back to my apartment. The door was unlocked, and everything inside looked normal. I stood there in the entryway, shaking and staring at my phone. The ride still hadn't ended. And every night since, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzes once. A notification. "Your driver has arrived." I don't open the app anymore. I can't. But sometimes when I'm in bed, I see it out of the corner of my eye. A faint glow, blinking red and green. And I hear them humming, waiting, just outside my window.
If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to let us know in the comments which story kept you up at night. Your feedback inspires us to create even more haunting adventures. Hit that like button to support the channel, share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another eerie encounter. And hey, if you have your own creepy story, drop it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Finally, check out the videos popping up on your screen right now for even more spine-tingling content. Trust me, you don't want to miss them. Stay safe and sleep well.